I'm out by the creek today, and I thought it would be a good time to compare the performance of my new Sigma 18-300mm DX format lens against the Nikon kit lenses that I've been using for the past decade. So first, let's be clear about the lenses I'm talking about. We have the Sigma 18-300mm super zoom lens. I have a Nikon 18-55mm VR2 standard kit lens, which I believe has been superseded by a VR3 now. This actually replaced the original VR model that I had gotten with my first DSLR, which was a Nikon D60. And this here is the Nikon 55-200mm VR kit lens, which also came with my D60. These are all DX format lenses, all are autofocus, and all have vibration reduction or optical stabilization built into the lens. Let's start with a visual comparison. The Sigma lens has 3 switches. It has a zoom lock, similar to my VR2 lens, which prevents the lens from moving during transportation, but is not meant to be used for shooting. An auto and manual focus toggle, which is the same as on my Nikons, and the OS for optical stabilization, which is the same as the VR vibration reduction on the Nikons. Holding it in my hand, it feels more sturdy, and it makes the Nikons kind of feel like toys in comparison. This is probably mostly due to the weight, which I'll cover later. The zoom ring is smooth and comfortable to use, however you'll note that it moves in the opposite direction that the Nikons do. This did take a little bit of getting used to, but it's not an issue for me anymore. Focus ring moves about 1/6 of a revolution, which is about the same as on the Nikons. The front is huge with a 72mm filter thread compared to the 52mm threading on the Nikons. Well, it's about the same length as the 55-200 Nikon when retracted. The fully extended length is a bit larger on the Sigma. The Sigma also comes with this hood. Compared to the hood that my Nikon 55-200mm lens came with, it looks much nicer and a lot more professional. I've actually been complimented by strangers on multiple occasions for having a nice looking camera, and that's never actually happened to me before. So if you're going on looks alone, you can't lose. Anyways, enough about the aesthetics. Let's look at performance now. Here are some comparison shots between the lenses. Let's start with it fully retracted at 18mm, and the aperture as wide open as can be. Ignore the exposure differences. I'm out here in natural lighting, and the level of light is changing in and out, which you can kind of see in the reflections in the water. The first thing I noticed here is the distortion. If you compare the Nikon to the Sigma here, you can definitely see it. It feels like it's bowing outward more in the tree in the upper left corner here. Another thing is the vignetting. It's really dark, as you can see on the... In particular, I notice it on the left side. You definitely see a loss in exposure around the edges, including in the very edge. It looks like it's just cropping completely there. That's probably not acceptable to most users. That's actually the worst part about this lens, I would say, is right there. As we close the aperture a little bit, let's look here now at f9. The vignetting is not nearly as bad. Distortion is the same. I wouldn't have expected that to change. As we go further down, we see that while the vignetting is improved, the cropping seems to become sharper. Maybe I have a defective unit, or maybe there's just something inherently wrong with the design of this lens. Jumping ahead to the other end of the zoom range, let's look at 55mm. Here we see an improvement in the distortion performance compared to my 18-55mm lens, while the 55-200mm lens seems to have the worst looking distortion. Vignetting is about the same, and we still see a little bit of cropping in the upper left corner in particular. Now if we jump up to 200mm, we see that the distortion looks to be a little bit better controlled. These lenses all have vibration reduction or optical stabilization built into them, so let's look at the performance. Starting with my Nikon 200mm lens, I'm going to set the shutter to 1/10 of a second. I'm going to turn off the vibration reduction feature on the lens, and I'm going to take a burst of 4 handheld shots focusing in on one point. You can see in the results here that the quality really isn't so great. I wouldn't expect much shooting a subject so far away at 1/10 of a second. So let's turn on vibration reduction now. Again, it's not really a great result. You can see a little bit of improvement. If we look at the best shots before compensating for vibrations and the best shot afterwards, we can see there's just a hair of improvement. It's not really worth writing home about, in my opinion. Let's look at the Sigma lens now. I'm going to zoom in also to about 200mm here, and I'm going to first turn off optical stabilization. So looking at this burst of shots, again, I wouldn't expect much. It looks pretty much exactly the same as I got on the Nikon lens. But now, let's turn on optical stabilization. Wow, that is incredible. I didn't actually expect that I would be seeing results this crisp. If we compare the best shot without stabilization to the best shot with, we can see that there's definitely an improvement. And now if we look at the Nikon versus the Sigma, comparing the best shots of these with the stabilization on, hands down, this isn't even a fair comparison. The Sigma wins leaps and bounds, is way better. If we zoom in to look at the full pixels, you can see that it is still a little soft. It's not a super crisp image, but compared to what it would be without stabilization on, you're getting a drastic performance boost here. Now that I'm back inside, let's compare the weight. I can tell you just anecdotally that the Sigma lens is significantly heavier. I was worried about this at first, but as it turns out, it hasn't actually been an issue for me. The Nikon D5100 body with battery is 577 grams. The Sigma 18 to 300mm lens is 603 grams. The Nikon 1855 VR2 lens is 213 grams. And finally, the Nikon 55 to 200mm VR lens is 352 grams. So the Sigma is close to twice the weight of the 55 to 200 lens. And the total weight around your neck with this and the camera body is going to be about 1.2 kilograms, or roughly 2.5 pounds. Another area to touch on is the minimum focusing distance. Let's take a look at what each of these lenses can offer. So what I've done here is I've placed a quarter in the range of the lens and will manually dial the focus down as low as it goes. Then I'll move the camera forward until I get the quarter optimally in focus. Then I can measure the minimum focusing distance of each lens at their extreme points. Starting with the Sigma, it looks like at 18mm it can focus on something as close as about 6 3/8 inches, or about 16.2 centimeters. At 300mm it can focus at 3 7/8 of an inch, or about 9.8 centimeters. On the Nikon 18 to 55 lens, at 18mm it can focus as close as 4 5/8 inches, or 11.7 centimeters. At 55mm, we have 4 1/4, or 10.8 centimeters. Finally, the Nikon 55 to 200 lens, at 55mm, can focus as close as, maybe as far as 35 1/4 inch, or 89.5 centimeters. And at 200mm, it's similar. The minimum focus distance is 34.5 inches, or 87.6 centimeters. In terms of focus distance, the Sigma looks best suited for more macro-style shots, and indeed they do market it as a macro lens. If you look at the zoom ring, you'll see that it shows the reproduction ratio as you slide it in and out. As I understand it, this means that when fully zoomed out, an object will be about 1/10 of its size when projected onto the image sensor, while when fully zoomed in, that same object will be about 1/3 of its size on the image sensor. There also exists an add-on specifically for this lens which will increase the ratio to 1 to 2, and I can review this add-on at a later date. What are my final thoughts on this lens? Well, let's break it down into a list of facts. Pro. Convenience. It has a large zoom range in a small package. Con. Vignetting and cropping. The vignetting gets better as the aperture is reduced, but the cropping does not. Neutral. Heavier than the kit lenses. Your preferences may vary, but for me this doesn't make a difference. Pro. Optical stabilization is amazing. Neutral. The distortion can be strong at lower focal lengths. This isn't a make-or-break feature for me, but it may be a con to you. Pro. Superior macro shooting. I need to point out that the cropping in particular is not something to be taken lightly. In the comparison images I took for this video, it was actually pretty minimal. Take a look at some of these other images I've taken recently with this lens. This could be a make-or-break attribute for you. I do wonder if I would have the same experience using a different camera body, or if I just happened to get a dud. Hey Sigma, if anyone's out there watching this video, reach out. I'd love for you to weigh in with additional data. Overall, this lens has won out as the lens that now lives on my camera. Its versatility outweighs the vignetting and cropping issues, as I often crop my images anyways to line up more with what I saw through the viewfinder, and I'm overall pleased with the results. Well, that's all I have for today. I hope this video has been informative and will provide you with some insight into your own purchasing decision. If you want to see more videos like this, please hit the subscribe button.